just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out.
Friday Java on the 23rd of November 2018, known for the commercial, in the commercial world I should say, in the U.S. as Black Friday, the shopping, what's the proper word to call it, bonanza maybe, but not as much as usual. The Retail Federation has basically said that consumers plan to spend about $200 more this year because, quote unquote, the good news. The good news may not be what it should be, but basically with consumers, and we'll remind consumers on Numbers Man, that'll be this weekend, to keep their eyes on the prize. There are some bargains out there if you need a TV set and a few other so-called bigger ticket items. They are much more inexpensive. Some of these TVs, etc., have been discontinued models. We are broadcasting here from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, and incidentally, we'll have a special program on Sunday. Jerry would have been Jerry's 79th birthday, and that will be on our usual channels. We hope to have some call-in over on the Blog Talk side of our network, and we'll make arrangements here, and we'll get that up today, the masthead up for Sunday, and we need to set a time. Probably will be, my guess is Sunday afternoon or early evening will be the time. Nonetheless, let us move on here to the caravan. This comes from the San Diego Union Tribune. The headline here, and it is the caravan pressed to within 500 feet of U.S. border, and this is by Wendy Fry. A small faction of a large number of 6,200 Central American immigrants in Tijuana slowly and peacefully pushed within 500 feet of the U.S. border, while the Mexican federal police held a barrier near the pedestrian walkway. There is a pedestrian walkway between Tijuana and San Diego, asking for more humane conditions in the flowing Beto Juarez shelter, and then trying to present themselves to U.S. immigration authorities for asylum. The group carried white flags as they marched from the migrant camp to the foot of the U.S. pedestrian bridge, a distance of about 5 city blocks. The immigrants had camped out in muddy, cramped conditions at an open-air sports arena, a soccer stadium, makeshift shelter. They said they are aware of Thanksgiving Day hunger as to Thanksgiving Day hunger as rain has worsened and almost unsanitary conditions in the packed shelter. There are sick children here. They are cold and hungry, said Carlos Lopez, a Honduran who is leading the group. Lopez added it was inappropriate to shelter the women and children outside. The whole world is watching what happens here. This is the basic inhumane treatment here, inhumanity to the humankind happening in Mexico. It should not happen there. Facilities should be provided there. The municipal authorities have said they're only equipped to handle a growing number of members of the caucus. The latest count from the Mexican authorities, again, is 6,219, with an additional 6,219, and an additional 6,690 moving towards Baja California from the Mexican state Jalisco. Hope I'm pronouncing that. Jalisco. Anyway, I'm not familiar with those states. DJ Trump threatened on Thursday to shut the border down, and the 1.6 million daily trading relationships with Mexico. He authorized U.S. forces to use lethal force if necessary to defend the border agents from immigrants attempting to cross into the U.S. This could also turn into a massacre. This thing is getting, as LBJ would say, very, very ugly. Using a bullhorn, Lopez galvanized a group of about 150 immigrants before they left by foot for the border. Today is a good day to present ourselves to the United States, Lopez said in Spanish. It's Thanksgiving Day in the U.S. today. It's a holiday or vacation day. Meanwhile, Customs and Border Protection made it clear they weren't taking a day off by briefly shutting down vehicle traffic at the port of entry, San Lucencio. A large-scale operation readiness exercise. They're increasing enforcement presence with helicopters, additional border agents, and U.S. troops. A convoy of military and border vehicles moved in place shortly before 2 p.m., and the troops marched towards a vehicle inspection area. Several large Department of Homeland Security and CBP helicopters circled overhead during this so-called drill. This is no drill. Anyway, during the march towards the border, the Mexican Federal Police, known as the Federales, and Edward Sosa, the director of National Humanities Rights Commission, tried convincing the migrants to turn around when they came over the Tijuana bridge connecting the Zone Norte neighborhoods, where many shelters are, to border infrastructure. The group urged to apply for work visas in Mexico, claiming thousands of jobs were available in Tijuana. The U.S. government only processed 100 applications for asylum a day. The process has been slow in recent months, leaving thousands on waiting. The applications are processed at the Yosindro port of entry, not the pedestrian bridge where the migrants are. Carrying white flags, La Paz de nos Nostria, our peace and God with us. A Honduran named Joseph declined to give his last name. I would imagine not. And let me finish up this article and we'll jump to the East Coast. But as the sun was setting on Thanksgiving Day, the group was settling in on the pedestrian plaza near where they are seeing the last of the bridge cross before the U.S. We have been walking for a month and a week, and we want to see the U.S., as Carlos Lopez has said. He is a leader, or one of the leaders of this march. Let's move from here to the East Coast. And one of the last survivors of the racial massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Dr. Olivia Hooker, has died. She was 103 years old. She was called it a catastrophic, the notorious 48-hour fire and death that leveled the area called Black Wall Street in Tulsa. She was, 6 years old at the time of the Tulsa race riot, which erupted on the 31st of May, 1921, when a European lynch mob descended on the courthouse where an African American, at that, a black teenager they say here, was being held. A group of African American war veterans tried to protect the teen, and ensuing violence, as many as 300 African Americans died, and thousands more saw their homes and livelihoods destroyed by torch. Some of the people were burned alive. 40 square blocks of business and residential property valued at more than $1 million. That would be multi-million today. Now, it was in the 20s. Dr. Hooker, leader, was the first African American woman to serve in the Coast Guard, and retired as an associate professor of psychology at Fordham University in New York. But at the time of her death, that was on November the 21st. I thought it was before. Anyway, she'd become one of the longest surviving Tulsa race riot survivors of the race riot massacre, and enduring witness to what was often regarded as the deadliest episode of racial violence in American history. In interviews, she recalled details of the rampage through a young girl's frightened eyes. Her father had been an owner of a department store in a community of Greenwood, a center of commerce known as Black Wall Street. When the mob reached Greenwood, burning houses and shooting people in the street, her mother hid her and her siblings under a big oak dining table. We could see what they were doing, she told the Washington Post in June. We took everything they thought was valuable and stashed everything they couldn't take. My mother had an opera singer, Caruso records she loved. They smashed the records. No doubt they were not lovers of opera. They poured oil over her grandmother's bed, but didn't light it because members of the mob were still in the house. It took me a long time to get over that nightmare, she told the Post. I was keeping my family aware of screaming. Screams all over the place. No doubt, as a little girl, her mostly seeming memory of the massacre was that the mob did to her doll. My grandmother had made some beautiful clothes for my doll, and it was the first ethnic doll we ever seen. She washed them, put them on the line, and then the marauders came, and the first thing they did was set fire to my doll's clothes. Dr. Hooker actually moved to Topeka, Kansas, where she remained while her father remained in Oklahoma trying to rebuild his business. He later went on a speaking tour of African American Methodist churches to recite the terrible situation. She returned to Tulsa to attend the Booker T. Washington High School. The teachers were scholars. They were determined every child should do his best, and every child would be taught the King's English, she recalled. Hopefully we speak that here. Later in World War II, she became part of Delta Sigma, Theta, the sorority's efforts to integrate the Navy. She told the Post she applied to the Navy, which had started accepting women. She was enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1945, 3 years after Congress passed a law approving creation of the Coast Guard Women Reserve to fill job vacancies by men who went abroad to fight in the war. Dr. Hooker became one of the first African American women to join the Women's Reserve, known as the ESPARS. She was stationed in Boston and performed administrative duties, and it was disbanded in 1946. She was discharged as a petty officer, second class, according to the Coast Guard. She became a senior clinical lecturer at Fordham in 1963 and retired in 1985. 30 years later, the Coast Guard named a building on Staten Island after her. Olivia Juliet Hooker was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma on the 12th of February 1915, one of 5 children. She graduated from Ohio State University in 1937, then taught elementary school in Columbus, Ohio. In 1947, she earned a Master's of Psychology from Teachers College, Columbus University, and in 1961 earned her doctorate from the University of Rochester. She died in White Plains. In 1997, she worked on the Race Riot Commission, the Tulsa Race Riot Commission there. And going on, the Tulsa Tribune published a news story with the headline, "Nabbed Negro for attacking girl in elevator," which many historians said prompted the massacre. The mayor recently reopened an investigation into the mass graves where witnesses say victims of the massacre were buried. In 2003, more than 100 survivors, about 300 descendants of those who lost property or were killed in the massacre filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma, seeking compensation for damage that occurred as a direct result of government involvement in the massacre. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2005 by the Supreme Court without a comment. I was glad to see so many of us were still there and still in the world trying to do good. That's what Dr. Hooker told the Post in June. As she sat in the front row at the Coast Guard ceremony, that was in 2015, she watched as President Barack Obama honored her, recounting her story as a tireless voice for justice and equality. Let me just check very briefly on this reopened case here. This part I had not looked at. This is Tulsa mayor reopens the 1921 racial riot. This is on October the 3rd. The city will reinvestigate whether there were mass graves from the century-old race massacre left hundreds of African Americans dead. The announcement came in a wake of a Washington Post story about unresolved questions surrounding one of the worst episodes of racial violence in history. Yet they prepare to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the rampage. The mayor, G.T. Bynum, said in an interview, "We owe it to the community to know if there are mass graves in the city." For decades, few talked about the rampage that began on the May 21st, 1921. And it goes on here. The mayor has made a decision in response to questions from Reverend Robert R.A. Turner, senior pastor at the Vernon A&M AME Church, one of the only surviving structures from 1921. Been a massacre when 10,000 people were displaced. That is unheard of today. So here we go once more here and finish that up. A very tragic story in the history of the American nation, no doubt about it. Let's jump now to the Commonwealth of Thanksgiving for 23,000. These are people in the Merrimack Valley. If you recall, the Merrimack Valley was the place where there was a terrible gas fire, Columbus gas fire, an explosion, which left 1 dead and more than 24 injured and thousands without heat in their homes. Period. What it takes to feed a community on Thanksgiving, 6,000 turkeys, 10,000 pounds of stuffing, 10,000 pounds of gravy, 10,000 pounds of mashed potatoes, and 8,000 pounds of green beans. So this was to the community struggling from that particular disaster. I won't go into all of it here. Able to sit down with the family, in spite of all the hardships that you're going through right now, to have a nice home-cooked, warm Thanksgiving meal. I think it allows you to reflect a little bit. That is from Tucson brand founder Joe Farrow. Said sometimes when bad things happen. Timing, making sure everything was cooked to the proper temperature, packaging and delivering warm and in a timely manner. The food was either distributed or served in a community meals across Andover, Lawrence, and North Andover, including a heated tent set up in the South Common Park in Lawrence, where a makeshift trailer encampment had been set up for people unable to stay in their homes. At the park, food was accompanied by music and Thanksgiving service in the Latino community. The spokesman for the Columbus, did I say Columbia? Columbia Gas, Scott Fearsome said, it's a Thanksgiving and people generally spend it with their families. We want to make sure they were able to do that. And some comments from some others here, that all we did was lose a couple of months worth of heat and hot water. We are in a trailer. We are making it. This is from one of the people, Rosie Davis. She's 70 years old. And the family couldn't make her a traditional German apple cake for Thanksgiving. That sounds good. And she hopes to be back in her home by Christmas. So this is truly a human tragedy. The multi-grain bakery, people were there preparing the meal. So this is out of that area down there, and we wish them the best. And to take all this out, cold temperatures set in the region of Thanksgiving. Record-breaking cold snap across the region on Thanksgiving, killing dozens of sea turtles on the Cape Cod, and plunging Mount Vernon into record-setting cold temperatures. From the National Weather Service, the Thursday chill makes it the coldest 22nd of November on record in Providence, Hartford, and Worcester. The mercury plunged to 11 in Hartford and breaking previous record of 14. Now that was in 1969. Dropped to 15 in Providence, and previous low mark there was 16 in Worcester, 7 degrees, breaking the previous record of 11, and so forth and so on. At 5 p.m. in Boston, it had not broken any temperatures, but it did tie for the lowest temperature on Thanksgiving at 24. And let's see what else we can get out of this. Well, we went over the The previous record was a minus 11. That was set in 1987. Remember that. The previous record for any day in November was a minus 20, which was set in 1958. Don't remember that one. The observatory keeping records in 1933. That was during the Depression. And while rain is expected this weekend, temperatures are, and this will be in most of the country, it'll be around 45 degrees. And Sunday they reach 50. Period. So people will officially forget about it. Period. This is about Governor Michael Dukakis, former governor here. He ran a state. He ran for president. No doubt about that. The former governor arrived at the transportation building known as a T. There were a few items on the agenda before it was his turn to speak. Professor Dukakis, who had come to present a presentation about a long debated rail link that's between North and South Station, listened to a report about a bridge that won awards. He listened to a pro forma board vote on contract amendment. One of the things we've been working on is aligning asset management activities with our TICA report. State Transportation Secretary Pollock there. At this point, Dukakis had been joined by former governors Bill Weir but Tom Brady and Trump could have walked arm in arm, and the report about caveats would not have paused. Anyway, Professor Dukakis, a public servant at heart, still beating his 85-year-old chest, sit there and listen. These days, he's come up, Senator Dukakis said he's come up with a lot around Thanksgiving because of his odds of enduring the habit of collecting leftover turkey carcasses of friends and a family to make a soup. He's a professor at Northeastern and in Los Angeles, but he's also routinely spotted picking up trash on the street. He's not a national treasure in fault of the rest of the nation, but he's a regional treasure, no doubt about that. His loss to George H.W. Bush in 1988, it was famously lopsided. He also got more than 40 million votes and roughly 45% of the popular vote in 1988. He was a lot closer to becoming president than anyone named George Bush. And it goes on here, what happened to people. Late John McCain went back to the Senate. Willard Romney was elected to the Senate. John Kerry became Secretary of State. Well, and I don't exactly know exactly what she was at the mass DOT meeting. Going back, Bob Dole, I remember Bob Dole became a legitimate celebrity and did commercials for Viagra, Pepsi. Al Gore won a Nobel Prize. And now maybe all these people will turn up at their local town hall meetings and wait patiently to talk about projects that are unlikely to ever begin in their lifetime. The caucus would and fairly regularly does to his lasting credit. It is the caucus difference there. As he said, he grew up in a Brookline and was riding those orange wooden trolley cars when I was 5. That'd been 80 years ago. I was interviewed at the meeting. A small fry alighting briefly on a fly on his face. Anyway, he talked about the battle over the master highway plan, and a trip out to Los Angeles was like living in a toxic stew. The former governor, Frank Sargent, Tip O'Neill, and more there. So he did get to speak. And there's another one in the Globe also about Governor Dukakis and the 1946 on some of our stations. You see him in 1946 Hudson. that he drives around in Friday in support of the North-South rail link. This is from North Station to South Station. We had an interesting day, he said, by phone, making a pit stop on the way to Lowell. It was remarkably good shape, I got to tell you, for a vehicle that was made in 1949, a little before we arrived on the scene. This year, the tunnel, and it'll be a tunnel, projected to cost $12 billion. In a debate for his re-election, old Charlie Baker said he wasn't convinced the rail link would be the best way to improve regional transit. Dukakis served 3 terms as Mass governor and was in 1968 the presidential candidate. So, Governor Dukakis is still out there. He's still, as they say, in the public eye. With his Hudson is rusty as the MBTA anyway. So he's out there and moving forward there. We already talked about the tension at the border in Tijuana, so this is from there. We pretty much covered everything. We want to look at briefly some polling here. Hopefully we can find the polling. Some things we'll leave to, I think we'll do it this way. We'll just go to Real Clear Politics and very quickly look at this polling. And on the week that was, we'll go into it. Incidentally, there is virtually no sports occurring. The NBA was off and the NHL was off. It was all NFL on Thanksgiving Day. They have a number of traditional games. The Detroit game, the Dallas game. And this is the last of the polling we have here. This is on Wednesday. We obviously wouldn't be polling there. YouGov has old DJ Trump at 45. When we looked at the Reuters, this is congressional. Sorry about that. The direction of country. Quinnipiac has DJ Trump at 41, and this is on Tuesday, and CBS News had him at 39. And the Cadillac of polling, that was on Monday. Gallup at 43. That is sort of high for him. If you look at the direction of his polling, take a quick look here before we depart. He was at 43. That was on the 12th of November. On, let's see, the 5th of November, he was at 38. So he was at, in October, the 29th of October, he was at 40%. So he's been running basically from, 38% to the lower 40s. That is from the Gallup organization, and that has been his approval rating here. Now, there's some of them outrageous, like Rasmussen. They'll have them at 49 or 50%. They're an outliner, so we don't really report them other than them being a goofy operation, as a fella once said. Let's quickly go to the BBC before we go here. The only thing DJ Trump would say, the CIA did not blame the Saudi crown prince. He's lying once again, but that's not anything new in that particular situation. This will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the week that was. That's on Saturday morning. And Numbers Man, that is our macroeconomic program. That'll be this weekend. And the open source report, we have about 50% of it done. We'll get it out perhaps later today. And then the Jerry Pippin birthday special, that'll be on Sunday, and the Monday morning quarterback, all on WBRN radio and the Boston Red Network. Take us out, Mr. Nelson. Good day.